Cast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to learn more about a new report on the opportunities for ZNE retrofits in K-12 schools and community colleges. This work is sponsored by the California Public Utilities Commission Energy Division. I am Connie Empress, Communication Manager at New Buildings Institute. Before we begin, I have a couple housekeeping things to tell you about. First, you are muted and we cannot hear you. This helps keep the background noise down so that everyone can better hear the speakers. I want to direct you to the dashboard that you should be able to see on the right-hand side of your screen. If you're having technical difficulties and cannot see the slides or hear our speakers, you can use the question pane in this dashboard to let us know and we will help you as we go. We will take questions at the end of the webinar, but you can ask questions anytime during the session using that same question pane. Today's speakers are NBI staff members Amy Cortez, our Associate Director, and Mark Lyles, one of our project managers. Amy Cortez has been involved in sustainable design consulting and implementation of energy efficiency market transformation approaches for over 20 years. Amy's work has included research projects ranging from a summary report of all net zero energy buildings and districts across North America, proof of concept studies for advanced lighting controls, technical analyses to assist portfolio owners in prioritizing energy efficiency improvements, and cost analysis for net zero energy, water, and living buildings. Mark Lyle's diverse experience includes the energy analysis of high-performance buildings and extensive research on the design and construction of low-energy buildings. As a project manager, he is integrally involved in the research and promotion of zero net energy buildings, as well as the technical and design development of key design resources and tools. With that, I will pass the mic over to Amy.
Thank you, Connie. So I'd like to get started by first recognizing and thanking everyone who has been involved in this research. Rob Hansen from the California Public Utility Commission Energy Division was the evaluation lead, and the CPUC advisors include Ralph Prahl, Nikhil Gandhi, and Mary Sutter. The research team here at NBI included myself, Mark Lyles, and Mark Frankel, and Kevin Madison and Jeremy Laurent were the energy modelers from Madison Engineering. When we're talking about ZNE, it's important to clarify the definition. In California, ZNE code definition is based on a time-dependent valuation approach. However, in this project, we've used a zero net energy source definition. ZNE source refers to a building that produces as much energy as consumed when you take into account the energy used in the transmission and the delivery back to the site. We did this K-14 study for three primary reasons. One, to better understand the stakeholders, decision-making processes, and funding involved in retrofits in schools in California. Two, to understand the technical potential of ZNE retrofits. And three, to provide recommendations to utility, program administrators, and other market actors on how to transform the K-14 schools market to meet California's aggressive zero net energy goals. The research had two primary and separate components, a market characterization and a technical sensitivity analysis. For the market characterization, we used secondary research methods to learn more about how the market worked. Then we did in-depth interviews to fill in the gaps and clarify nuances on the market functions. On the technical side, we partnered with Madison Engineering to conduct energy modeling. A little later in this webinar, I'll describe the sensitivity analysis in more detail. The original aim for the number of in-depth interviews was between 21 and 29 individuals familiar with the school's market. The investor-owned utility program administrator staff, facility managers, and architect and engineering staff interviewed, they were all familiar and had at least some experience with ZNE. State government staff, school board members, and administrators weren't necessarily familiar with the concepts. Ultimately, we ended up talking with 22 individuals through a snowball sampling approach. Before we get into the details, a quick preview of some key findings. While it may seem obvious, this research has confirmed the overarching driver of decision makers in the school market is educational outcomes. In other words, energy is clearly not a driver when deciding on which schools to retrofit. In fact, it's not even mentioned in some key plans and documents. And it became clear that daily operations are driven by the health and safety considerations primarily. Another important point is that ZNE is a fairly new concept, especially the concept of ZNE retrofits, which is not surprising since no school has ever been retrofit to ZNE performance. In the research, we learned that deferred maintenance needs are substantial. And the Berkeley Center for Cities and Schools suggests that this is due to a structural pattern of underinvestment in operations and maintenance that's prevalent across schools in California. Another thing we learned is that K-12 schools have a fairly complicated market structure with many participants and influencers. Another complication for program administrators is the disaggregation in the market. What we mean by this is that decisions are made at the local level and there are many different individual districts, as we'll see next. And finally, the sensitivity analysis suggests that ZNE retrofits are possible in school buildings of all types and in all 16 climate zones across California. We also thought it was important to mention at the beginning some of the benefits associated with high performance schools and zero net energy. So ZNE buildings have many of these same attributes as high performance schools that have been studied a lot about what those benefits are. We've seen studies that suggest that better daylighting leads to higher test scores. There's a correlation with increased average daily attendance. Reduced operating costs from lower energy bills is an obvious one. But we also see things like increased teacher satisfaction, reduced liability, and environmental impacts. ZNE buildings also have a unique opportunity to serve as a teaching tool right there on the site. So that's integrated, that can be integrated into the curriculum. So with that quick overview, I'm going to pass it off to Mark Lyles to talk a little bit about the market characterization aspects of this research.
Thank you, Amy. According to the California Department of Education, over 6.2 million students attended kindergarten through 12th grade in California public schools. I want that number to soak in for a moment. 6.2 million is more than there are 32 states with smaller populations than 6.2 million. So a massive amount of students are attending California public schools every single day. As expected, enrollment generally tracks with large population and urban areas, as you can see on the map that's on your screen. California has just over 1,000 different school districts with 10,452 public school buildings or schools. The districts are made up of 526 elementary school districts, 77 high school districts, and 343 unified school districts where you combine elementary and high schools into one district. The chart on your screen shows the 28 counties with the largest enrollment in count of schools. At the top, you can see Los Angeles County far exceeds the others, both in number of schools and number of students. One of the things that this study looked at as well was the number of market actors that are involved in the retrofit process, and we found that it is a complex network of stakeholders and decision makers. As Amy already mentioned, and it was something that it was important to keep in mind, the primary driver of all key decision makers in the K-14 school market is to educate students. Operating safe and healthy schools is paramount, and energy is a low priority. In the report, we describe in detail each of the market actors and explain their roles in the decision-making process. In the report, we categorize these as state-level market actors, made up of the Department of Education, DSA, and the School Allocation Board. Then you would have the school district market actors, which are usually school administrators and facility staff members, as well as, in some cases, teachers. And then you have consultants serving as subject matter experts and utility program administrators that influence and advise decision makers within the school. You also have a number of public interest groups that are involved. It's important to keep in mind that schools are really a foundation of our communities, and the interests are diverse and varied, ranging from parents and students to community groups that may use the facilities for after-school daycare, meetings, or other activities such as sports. Community members often sit on advisory committees to formally provide input to school board members and others about topics important to the school. In addition to the community stakeholders, other groups with interest in schools are groups such as the Collaborative for High Performance Schools, CHIPS, that Amy already mentioned, U.S. Green Building Council Center for Green Schools, DOE Zero Energy Accelerator Program, which all advocate for healthy and high performance schools. There are other interest groups such as the Coalition for Adequate School Housing and the School Energy Coalition, who work with state legislature to ensure adequate funding for school facilities. Some of these interest groups also have high performance goals. CHIPS is probably the best example of this. Their CHIPS rating system is a program that 42 different school districts across the state have established as a formal policy. These CHIPS districts are found across the state and range in size from large to small, as shown on the map. Now I want to get into the decision-making structure that often goes into funding a K-12 retrofit project. It starts with a locally defined modernization project. This is usually paid for by a locally approved bond. While there are numerous actors that go into this process, it's really the voters and the school board members that are responsible for getting the bond passed. These are supported by a number of actors kind of doing pre-bond work that really kind of help move this process forward. You have the school superintendent as well as other school administrators. These are often influenced and informed by consultants such as architects, bond consultants, facility evaluators, and demographers. And then, of course, you have the stakeholders locally that have an influence on the bond process and also the final outcome, which is the locally defined modernization project. Post-bond, you see a lot of the same market actors involved, but as well as the consultants that are involved in implementing the project. As you can see here, not only have we identified some of the major actors, but you can also see the flow, where the funds flow in the post-bond process, as well as from the locally approved bond, as well as the arrows that indicate the key decision makers and also those who have a level of influence. So that is primarily looking at the local level, where, as our research determined, a lot of the decision making happens in the K-12 market. But there's also funding that happens at the state level. A lot of you may be familiar with this, but you have the general obligation bonds, and then you also have Prop 39 as really the two big pools of money that are flowing to K-12 projects. You also have the California investor-owned utilities that fund energy efficiency projects. The Prop 39 and general bonds are really administered by the California Department of Education and DGS. These bonds, or these monies, flow through a number of state level actors that implement programs. You have Prop 39, which is, we'll get into it a little bit later on. You have the school energy efficiency program, and then you have the modernization program. It is important to note that the modernization program is a matching fund where you have to have the local bond pass first, and then that makes a school district eligible for the modernization program. And that is funded as a 40-60 match. So as you can see, this process is complicated, and we had to redo this diagram numerous times in order to do our best to accurately characterize these relationships. Next, I want to get into sampling of the policies, plans, and practices at local districts that we found, which really affect energy in schools. It's important to note that not all schools have these in place. These are really just examples of the mechanisms that might be used to establish a continuous energy improvement approach in school districts, which is important to getting on the path to ZNE. First, you have the facilities master plan, which serves as a guide for investments and capital improvements across a school district's portfolio. If a school is not planning capital improvements, it may not have an updated facilities master plan. People that we interviewed doing this research described the development of this plan as a data-heavy process with input from demographers and bond consultants. Energy is not necessarily always considered in the facilities master plan. Next, you have the owner's project requirements, or the OPR, which formally outline objectives and expectations for a particular project. It explains how space is expected to be used, provides equipment specifications, and specific performance criteria. They may or may not include high performance equipment and may only be developed for new construction projects and not retrofits. Next, you have the energy master plan, which only we found in a few cases, and these tend to be the large urban districts with more motivation to save costs on energy. This plan sets out energy reduction goals, identifies actions to be taken, and funding sources to help pay for those actions. And then in one case, you have also the carbon reduction plan, which can be used by a school district to help reduce carbon emissions. The one district that we found that has implemented this is San Francisco Unified, which just passed their plan this week. This takes the energy master plan one step further to discuss a district's approach to electrification to get them on the path to carbon neutral. This is a very new approach and something that can be emulated by others. Next, we have the energy expenditure plan, which is required in order to receive Prop 39 funding. The California Energy Commission has laid out a clear process of best practices before a district can develop this plan and get money. One thing that is required in the energy expenditure plan is benchmarking, and this is something that is really important to acknowledge as part of the ZNE process. This means that most districts are doing it who are involved with the Prop 39 process. However, from the interviews, it seemed clear that this was considered to be something else on the to-do list and not necessarily used by districts as a decision-making tool, which might be an opportunity going forward. Then you also have the CHIPS policies, which I discussed in the last slide, which is being implemented by 42 districts across the state. While CHIPS has a separate rating system for operation and maintenance, the uptake by districts is small, but might be an interesting way to encourage ongoing attention to energy in schools. And finally, you have the power purchase agreements, or the PPAs, which are a common way to bring renewable energy systems to schools. Districts interested in entering into PPAs partner with solar companies who facilitate the overall development, installation, and maintenance of the solar array in return for lower and fixed energy costs to the district over a contracted time period. One advantage to the school district is the ability to capture the 30% solar tax credit by passing this through to the developer of the project. So that really summarizes kind of the K-12 process and decision makers and actors, and can't really be applied to the California community colleges, which kind of have their own process for decision making and energy. I'm going to just go over quickly the count of community colleges in the state. You have 72 community colleges, 113 campuses, and 2.3 million students, according to 2015-2016 statistics. At the community college level in California, the colleges really have the responsibility to maintain and renew and enlarge where needed facilities on behalf of their students. The governing board of each community college district goes through a 5-year capital outlay planning process that is submitted on an annual basis. This defines their projects and priorities and considers enrollment trends and space inventory, among other things. Community college districts develop an education master plan and a facilities master plan to inform key components of the capital outlay plan. The community colleges also raise money locally through bond measures, and those seeking state funding for specific projects in the construction plan are required to go through a 2-stage proposal process that is similar to the K-12 market. All projects must be approved by the Division of the State Architect for compliance with all applicable codes and standards. The capital outlay plans are submitted through an online tool or portal known as Fusion to streamline the submission of required documentation and to provide the State Chancellor's Office a way to track the facility, space needs, and projects. So that really summarizes K-12 and community colleges, and now we're going to kind of get into some of the funding sources. I already talked a little bit about Prop 39 and wanted to go a little bit deep in depth, more in depth on the Prop 39 funding. Prop 39, or the California Clean Energy Jobs Act, as it is locally known, changed the corporate tax structure and allocated projected tax revenue over a 5-year period to the California Clean Energy Job Creation Fund. This fund directs money to school districts and community colleges to improve energy efficiency and create clean energy jobs. It was passed in 2012. And since then, the Prop 39 initiative has allocated $1.4 billion to the California Clean Energy Job Fund. All districts and community colleges are eligible to apply for funding, distributed on a formula that is based on average daily attendance and the number of free and reduced meals. So it is not a matching fund similar to the other funding source that I had mentioned. The California Department of Education distributes monies to local school districts once the California Energy Commission has approved a formal energy efficiency plan. The CEC has laid out a clear process of best practices that all districts must complete before their plan is approved. Specifically, this includes collecting utility information and benchmarking data on the energy performance of their schools. And really, when considering upgrades, are advised to prioritize energy projects with appropriate sequencing of energy conservation measures. This includes also a walkthrough energy audit and can really help the districts develop their energy efficiency plans. So the Prop 39 project, that our allocation of funds that I just mentioned, is separate from the IOU K14 ZNE pilot project, which is also being implemented. The California IOUs are administrating a pilot ZNE technical proof of concept for retrofitting existing school buildings to ZNE. The IOUs aim to facilitate about a dozen ZNE school building retrofit projects, as well as to develop a scaled incentive program to operate subsequent to the completion of the pilot. Thus far, round 1 pilot projects have been selected, and potential round 2 projects are currently being assessed. Additional pilot elements include marketing, education, and outreach, development and dissemination of case studies, and development of training activities. These projects have proved to be really valuable to our research process, and everyone that we spoke with that was involved with these pilot projects had great information to offer, and we hope that that comes through in the report. So finally, I want to talk about the implications of the market structure and really decision making on as it applies to ZNE. The complicated market structure and decision making process has a few important implications for ZNE. First, efforts on ZNE and deep energy efficiency must consistently align with educational objectives if the goal is to be successful. This is critical, and we heard this from many of the school administrators that we talked to that were involved with ZNE or deep energy retrofit projects. This is not the current model in most K-12 schools where energy is not a primary driver for decision making. Part of this has to do with the complex process that goes into the capital planning process. But we have heard if you can tie in energy outcomes and goals, it can be very beneficial. Having an energy policy in place is a great starting point. We also found that most decisions happen at the district level in order to best respond to local needs, but this can make it difficult to streamline energy processes and policies at the state level. And finally, we need to acknowledge that there are other priorities driving decisions at K-12 schools. In these cases, it is important to remember that getting on the path to ZNE can start with small steps, that it is not always necessary to adopt a full-blown ZNE policy or goal right off the bat. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Amy, who is going to get into the ZNE technical potential sensitivity analysis that was conducted.
Great, thanks, Mark. So a sensitivity analysis uses energy modeling to determine the relative magnitude of different performance factors that contribute to energy use in buildings. So these factors include the building physical characteristics, the operational practices, and occupant schedules, like when people are in the building. So what we wanted to do is identify the upgrades and conditions that might have the greatest impact on ZNE performance, and then understand the sensitivity of school energy performance to the variables like climate, vintage, meaning the age of the building, and the relative impact of different system upgrades on building energy performance. Ultimately, the results of the analysis are used to estimate the savings that might be achieved across the entire school sector in California. So here's how we set up the modeling exercise. We started with the 4 building prototypes and standard assumptions found in the California Database for Energy Efficiency Resources. That's commonly referred to as the DEAR database. So these prototypes and the assumptions in them include elementary schools, secondary schools, community colleges, and relocatable classrooms, otherwise known as portables. For each of these prototypes, we assigned specific building characteristics, like building envelope performance or system performance characteristics that are based on the building age that was in place at the time, and the code that was in place, at the time of the building was built. So then we ran the model and found results for each prototype and vintage combination separately in all 16 climate zones. So on the chart, what you're seeing is the energy use intensity, or EUI, that results from the 96 baseline energy model results that we have for high schools. 1 mark represents each vintage and climate zone. So generally, when we look at this chart, what we see is quite a variation between older buildings and newer secondary high school buildings, which is expected because energy codes have continually improved over time in California. Once we finish the baseline modeling runs, we then improved the system level efficiency parameters, of which we had 3: HVAC, envelope, and internal gains. So internal gains are things like lights and plug-in equipment inside the building. So for each parameter, we had 3 different bundles of packages. So each parameter had 3 packages that we investigated, and we ran the energy simulation with one of those packages at a time against these appropriate baselines. And then we ran the model with bundles of packages, multiple packages together, and so on until we ran all three of them against all of the different baselines. So what we did was try to create a set of savings values that estimated the relative savings that might be expected for a set of deep energy retrofits, making sure that we looked at whole building and interactive effects as well as individual measure installations. So when you roll up the thousands of model runs that we did, this is what we find. The brown bars on the right represent the range of performance we saw in the baseline models. So for example, in the baseline model for community colleges, the lowest EUI was 50.4, whoops, and the highest was 75.4 with a weighted average of 67.9. The tan bars on the left represent the highest and lowest results that we saw for the best performance modeling runs. A couple of key takeaways here. First, community colleges consistently use more energy than primary and secondary schools, both before and after the upgrades. Second, we see a wide range of performance in relocatable classrooms. And this is largely a reflection of the poor building envelope and how that relates to various climate zones across California. Another key takeaway here is that despite a large variation in expected performance in baseline schools, the best resulting EUIs is very focused in a narrow range of performance between 19 and 30 kilobtu per square foot per year. This chart shows the results by climate zone for community colleges only. Each of the charts each of the lines and bars represent a different climate zone. And the total length of the bar with all the colors show the range of the baseline performance for community colleges. The green segment of the bar is the amount of savings attributed to HVAC. Just to the left in the bright blue is the contribution from internal gains, followed by envelope savings, and finally domestic hot water. The remaining dark blue bars represent the resulting model from the best case scenario. Again, you can see these all line up much more than the the jagged edge that we see over here on the right. Another interesting takeaway from this is the amount of savings reflected in the green bar for HVAC. So this is showing us that the HVAC savings are very important to an ultimate ZNE result. Another interesting result from the sensitivity analysis has to do with what we call the changing pie of ZNE. Again, on the right is the baseline for community colleges, and the left is the best performance, and this is just representing one climate zone. These pies show significant reductions in heating, cooling, and lighting energy as a percentage of total building load, and a shift of loads driven by internal gains from lights and equipment. The most significant change is in the proportion of building energy presented by miscellaneous equipment. This category includes computers, printers, labs, and other equipment that generally has more to do with the building's functional and occupant needs than the building design features, which is what currently is regulated by code. So, as the pie shrinks and the regulated loads get smaller, the percent of the pie from the equipment increases. This means that in these ultra-low energy schools, tracking and managing these unregulated loads becomes much more important to the overall building performance than it was before the upgrade. Similar results are seen in the changing components of the pie chart and other building prototypes. This has very significant implications on how these buildings will need to be managed and maintained in order to achieve the performance levels targeted when ZNE. The sensitivity analysis also investigated the impact of building operations and maintenance on energy performance. To understand the importance of O&M, the team created a modified modeling baseline that represented poor or unnecessarily long operations for energy using equipment. The results indicate that the energy impacts of these unnecessarily long operations could result in these buildings using 10% more energy than is expected as you can see by the orange ends of the bars here on the chart. And this is really when we're only looking at a subset of potential operational issues. We know there may be more operational savings out there possible. So clearly, in order to achieve a ZNE result, a focus on this ongoing operations is going to be a necessary part of any strategy. We know this is a challenge, especially when we consider that O&M have been largely neglected in the schools market, which has contributed to the significant deferred maintenance issues that we found in the market characterization. The sensitivity analysis uncovered some broad patterns and opportunities in the California school building stock and can inform efforts to achieve widespread ZNE performance. One finding is that significant improvement appears to be possible across all 4 building prototypes in all climate zones and for buildings of all ages. Interestingly, the results suggest that no matter the climate, the age of the building, or the starting baseline performance, the results of technically feasible deep energy retrofits converge in a narrow range of performance expressed as an energy use intensity generally between 19 and 29 kilobtu per square foot per year. This number varies slightly by building type, with community colleges using more energy than primary and secondary schools, even after the deep retrofits. Relocatable classrooms, or portables, they're significantly poor performers and are challenged by the portable's envelope condition. Another finding suggests that in deep energy retrofits, the bulk of the savings comes from HVAC systems. Yet what we found in the market characterization was that HVAC upgrades are typically more expensive and have a much harder time meeting the stringent cost effectiveness tests set out by utility program administrators and the California Energy Commission under the Prop 39 framework. And finally, it's important to mention that managing plug loads is going to be a very important part of achieving success in ZNE school retrofits. In summary, the sensitivity analysis suggests that across all school prototypes, savings of more than 50% is technically possible. These are impressively low EUIs for retrofits, and they seem to be on par with the energy targets that we're seeing in zero net energy projects in new construction as well. The numbers are consistent across the state, no matter where the buildings are or when they were built. And the primary school and secondary schools seem to converge in the low 20s, whereas the community colleges are more in the high 20s. Taking those EUI reductions from the site energy level and expanding that back to the source with generation and transmission losses accounted for, the overall market savings potential appears to be about 61 million BTU whenever you extrapolate that across schools in the whole market. So to put that in some context, the K-14 market represents about 5% of all site electricity consumption in the state. And this savings of all schools being zero energy represents about 20% of the annual technical potential for all EE energy efficiency measures in the state. During this research, we learned a lot about both how the market functions and the technical potential for ZNE schools. So based on this experience, we now want to discuss some of the barriers to widespread adoption of ZNE retrofits in schools and provide recommendations and considerations on how to overcome them for various market actors. We boiled it down to 3 primary market barriers: lack of awareness, lack of processes surrounding energy, and lack of dedicated funds for energy efficiency. It seems clear from the research and our experience in the market that more education of school decision makers about zero net energy and its benefits is needed. For program administrators, we recommend continuing the workforce education and training programs that have started under the ZNE Prop 39 ZNE pilot program. These trainings are going out and talking to designers, school district staff, school board members, talking about the benefits of ZNE and also the technical ways to achieve it. Case studies are an important way to spread the learnings, the lessons learned and the approaches. Tours can also be effective ways to make people understand more about how these buildings function and some of the approaches that were used to put them in place. The investor-owned utilities in California have started a ZNE school recognition program to celebrate and recognize leaders in ZNE schools. And this is something we think will help create this market, create buzz among the market actors, and encourage more people to pursue ZNE strategies. The Building Operator Certification Program is one that's been around for many years to train facility staff on efficient building operations. This is something that we think would be valuable for the schools market, and we also recommend that program administrators even help offset the cost for school facility staff to participate. We talked a lot about the importance of the building occupants. It's also clear that occupant training upon moving into a new ZNE building is required. It's good to get these occupants engaged even before the building all the measures are installed in the building, but it really is important to establish these training programs and make sure people know that their actions in the buildings contribute a lot to the ZNE result, and make sure they understand how to use these systems that maybe they've never seen before. There's also a unique opportunity to increase awareness in a partnership with community colleges through workforce development and training programs. So community colleges are a link to helping develop the next generation of facility folks that can go out and do audits to identify opportunities to install energy efficiency measures. They also can be trained to actually install them, and it would be good to have this training go beyond lighting. We see in the Prop 39 world, they've approved 18,000 measures, and about half of them are lighting. So we saw that HVAC was really important, so some training in those areas would be helpful. Same with renewable energy installation. More professionals out there who understand how to install these things would be helpful for the overall market. There's also an opportunity to help districts put plans, policies, and practice in place that support energy efficiency. So school districts themselves can have aspirational goals, like San Francisco's sustainability goals, where they aim to have all buildings using less than 20 kilobtu per square foot per year by 2040. So developing this roadmap and helping support staff in the implementation of this is something everybody at schools, whether it's school board members, superintendents, or the staff that work on the facilities, they can all be aiming towards a common goal. School districts and utility program implementers can work together to pilot some new approaches. One that was interesting is performance-based procurement. And what that means is using energy targets in the contracting process. So when they hire an architect or an energy service provider, it becomes part of contractual documents what the energy target is in that building. So that actually brings energy much more higher up in visibility, and we see teams start organizing the using energy almost like having an energy budget, much like they have a financial budget. We think the program administrators can step in and help school districts incentivize the development of some of these master plans that incorporate energy. By raising the visibility of energy and energy performance, it's more likely that energy considerations will get into that facility's master plan and eventually into the bond measures. So that these considerations are kind of fundamental to the ongoing projects that we see happening in schools. Some of this can happen, some of this planning exercise could be integrated into key components of strategic energy management and behavioral retrocommissioning and operations programs. So these programs are already out there and exist and can be modified slightly to incorporate aspects of zero net energy. Also on the processes side, we think there's an opportunity for program administrators to facilitate cohorts or small groups of districts in their development of a ZNE roadmap. So basically what this means is have peer-to-peer learning with small groups of districts that all work together with a facilitator and subject matter experts that are provided on behalf of the program administrators and the investor-owned utilities. Topics might be benchmarking, ZNE, walk through site assessments, or operating ZNE buildings. But the idea is to get the discussion going and encourage these school districts to learn from each other and advance their practices together. The ultimate result of this process would be the development of the ZNE roadmap and some more clear plans on how they're going to achieve some of their aggressive goals. Another recommendation is for the program administrators and the California Energy Commission to encourage districts to collect information that would be important in school energy decision making. So for example, providing a framework of what data would be important to collect about a building, not just the building square footage and when it was built, but also what systems are in the building, what the window conditions are like. That type of information can be really valuable and really lower cost in doing some of the energy expenditure plans. Funding was another barrier to energy efficiency in schools and zero net energy. There are just so many competing priorities in school districts, and so it's important to raise the profile by providing sources of funding that are dedicated to energy efficiency. We think program administrators can expand the ZNE school retrofit pilot beyond this technical proof of concept. And we recommend 50 to 100 more pilot projects so that they span geographical diversity across the state, existing conditions, different decision-making processes. And then the implementation of measures there can be used to study for costs and ways to get to zero net energy to scale. We think PAs are in a good position to support school districts in going beyond lighting retrofits and helping offset the costs of those more expensive HVAC replacements that are really critical to a ZNE result. Another thing that the PAs are currently doing in the ZNE pilot is supporting the participation of design team after occupancy. Not surprising, the design team is often off to the next project, and sometimes these buildings don't function the way they should right away. So having those design team on the continuing on the project for about a year or more after the buildings open will help ensure these ZNE results. The California Energy Commission laid out a very sound framework under the Prop 39 program, and even when that funding goes away, if more funding becomes available, we think that framework should be continued and leveraged moving forward. One of the challenges that we talked about is this cost effectiveness rule, and one thing we see in those calculations is the value of non-energy benefits. Right now there's a 5% adder for non-energy effects or non-energy benefits. There's a lot of research that out there that suggests that there are significant non-energy benefits that attribute to better acoustics or better ventilation or better daylighting. So our recommendation is for these agencies to compile some of these research projects and maybe do some primary research to fully value these non-energy benefits. Schools may be a good building type under what's called the AB 802 normalized metered energy consumption process. Basically, this is suggesting that schools would be a good building type to take advantage of operational savings that might attribute from practices that happen in schools. And this is one way to do it under the current utility frameworks. A new idea is for bond eco-charrettes. So an eco-charrette is an integrated design meeting that happens early in new construction programs or new construction projects. It's where multi-stakeholders get together and talk about sustainability and energy goals. What we see in school market is when they pass a bond, it often touches multiple buildings. So the recommendation here is to host a bond charrette right after that bond gets started, to bring all these teams and school board members and other stakeholders together to set goals for all the projects that are going to be implemented under that bond. By setting these energy targets early, it's in the design team's mind and they know it's a priority, and that would make it more likely that they're going to achieve those results. And finally, we believe that if more funding becomes available for schools, another substantial amount of funding like was under Prop 39, that it would make sense to have an interagency effort of a strategic plan for the K-14 schools market to transition to ultra-low energy and eventually ZNE. So the agencies that might be involved in that include the California Department of Education, the California Energy Commission, the Public Utility Commission, and in the Department of General Services, the Division of the State Architect. It seems that the DSA might be a good group to help facilitate this interagency effort to really help put the schools in California on the path to ZNE. So in conclusion, it won't be easy to get schools to zero net energy, but it is technically possible, and we're seeing a lot of excitement in the market right now. We think some of these ideas will help put schools in California on the path to achieving California's aggressive ZNE goals. So thank you all for taking time to hear a little bit more about the research that we've been doing, and I think we have a couple more minutes for questions. Connie, do you want to talk a little bit more about how to submit questions? Or perhaps you have some already.
We do have some questions and one comment. One of our IOU reps is on the line today and wanted to reiterate that the real world results that are being achieved with the Prop 39 pilot are in line with the modeled results of this study. So just wanted to put that comment out there. And we have a couple.
Yeah, I think that's.
Go ahead.
That's a really important point. So thank you for offering that.
Mm-hmm. And so we've got at least a couple questions about HVAC. So I'll just start going down. Are the significant HVAC savings made possible through equipment replacement change or due to better control strategies, including building automation systems?
So we had we have more details in the report, obviously, which we can send out to everyone. But the packages, remember how I mentioned that we had different packages of measures. So the packages did look at both equipment replacement and then also modifications of some of the controls and control strategies as well. So the bundles of packages represent the different equipment change-outs opportunities.
Okay. Let's see. And we also had another comment from our San Francisco Unified School District rep who's on the line, that their modeling that they're working on is showing EUIs in the low teens. For that little bit of info. We had a question about the energy modeling software. Do you know which software was used for these case studies?
I believe, Kevin, medicine engineering uses eQuest.
It was eQuest with the DOE 2.2 hourly building simulation engine.
This is a question a little off the California topic, but do you know of school districts in other states that are attempting these kind of ZNE goals?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the groups that has been involved in zero energy is the U.S. Department of Energy's Zero Energy School Accelerator Program, ZESA for short. And ZESA has compiled a cohort of school districts from all across the country. So we're seeing schools from Virginia, South Carolina, California, Colorado. There are school districts all over the country that are embracing and aggressively pursuing ZNE, both in existing school retrofits and in new construction.
And I would just give some props to some of the people that we talked to that are really leading the way in California on this, acknowledge the work that has been done by the Boulder Valley School District as being real pioneers in this area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see. We've had quite a few questions about the report being available. When do you suspect that will be available, Amy?
We're working on the absolute final revisions, and it should be available very soon. And what we'll do is when we send out the recording to this, we'll make sure that everybody has a link to the final report as well.
Great. And let's see. There was one question. Can you tell us again what proportion of California's statewide potential energy reduction the K-14 market represented? Was it 20% of buildings or?
It was 20% of the energy efficiency potential, which is substantial. So it's important to keep in mind that that reflects all schools and community colleges in California getting to zero. If all of those retrofits are in place, by our estimates and the extrapolation that we did, it represents about 20%.
Okay, and we have one last.
Long way to go to get there.
One last question about the HVAC. Isn't the HVAC savings component significantly influenced by envelope enhancements? And were those envelope enhancements part of the savings attributed to that HVAC system change?
Mm-hmm. So what we tried to do was find the interactive effects. And when it came down to the results, it appeared that the HVAC was much more substantial. We do recommend that energy load reduction and envelope modifications happen before the HVAC, right? Because if you can buy a smaller HVAC system, you'll end up spending more money. But it didn't appear that widespread window replacement or anything was necessary, in the aggregate. So having said that, in individual schools, it very well may be that it's appropriate to do window replacements. However, in the ZNE pilots that are happening, the retrofit pilots that are happening now, it's more about caulking and sealing than it is about wholesale replacement of windows or envelopes. So, so that that could be seen as good news because those are quite expensive sometimes. But it's not to say that in particular certain circumstances it's not entirely appropriate. Of course, retrofits are going to depend on the existing condition, and that's why the California Energy Commission requires those walkthrough audits before the plans and the monies are released.
Okay. Well, we've hit our hour, and we don't have questions coming in at this point.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for participating. We look forward to having more dialogue about this really interesting research, and we'll be sure to send out a copy of the recording and links to where the research report will be available. I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.